Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about the Dark Elves in Total War Warhammer 3, the ignored Dark Elves. One of the things I argued with Tides of Torment months ago is that Creative Assembly should have done Slaanesh, High Elves, and Dark Elves. Instead, they decided to do Norska. Now, Norska has benefited a lot from the Tides of Torment DLC, but it kind of feels weird to have a DLC that did a lot of things for High Elves, but not so much for Dark Elves. Though, given the state of the High Elf rework, maybe that's for the best. But I want to take this opportunity to talk about the way Dark Elves work, what's great about them, and where Creative Assembly could improve them as a race. The most obvious aspects with regards to racial improvements would be to rights. So, when we look at the various sacrifices that we have as Dark Elves, the cooldown on these things is extremely long. Especially, a problem is with the sacrifice of Mephilan. So if you're playing Lokir, you'll have plenty of Black Arcs. If you're playing anyone else, you won't, because it is a 25 turn cooldown to get them. Now, that's not necessarily too big of an issue, but it does absolutely limit your options in a campaign. It's not too big of an issue because Dark Elves are ridiculously strong, but it does mean you have fewer of these mobile command posts. And as Dark Elves, you do not have access to an encamp stance, you do not have access to global recruitment, and that is a problem. I would say the lack of an encamp stance ends up actually hurting them a fair amount. Simply because you can only raid in a province to negate attrition, as opposed to using, encamp stance. Sure, it does only remove 25 campaign movement range, but it does have its own issues with regards to how things work regarding that. Because if you want to replenish in a foreign territory, you have to use channeling stance. So if Raining Sands at least gave you replenishment, that would be better, but it does not, unfortunately. So that is a bit of an issue with regards to Dark Elves, that lack of an encamp stance, that global recruitment limit that every one of them has except Lokir, because they have Black Arcs, they don't have global recruitment. Again, Dark Elves are really good. And another thing that Creative Assembly could do is reworking the research tree, because it is very outdated in terms of a research tree, and truthfully, you don't care about most of the things here in the research tree. All you really want, because Black Arcs are so limited and their growth is what it is, you actually just want to get the upgrades as quickly as possible. So outside of, getting things like exploiting feuds, if even that, you're just getting the same research over and over and over again in a campaign. So I think Black Arc growth should be different. I think that the research tree should be different and improve with different tabs. Maybe if you want to look at a good research tree, look at Kislev. Another thing to be said about Dark Elves is that every single one of their heroes is either recruited at tier 3 or, in the case of Masters, at tier 2. But all of them also increase capacity at tier 3. Unless you're playing Morathi, in which case K-Knight Assassins can only be recruited and increase capacity at tier 4, but that's a specific thing to Morathi. That means Dark Elves do end up having an extraordinary level of power because they can get a lot of heroes. And they can get these heroes even from minor settlements, with the exception of mages. So you can get Death Hags, you can get K-Knight Assassins, you can get Masters through minor settlements and increase their capacity there as well. That is a great system, and that certainly gives Dark Elves a huge advantage. Another thing to be said here is that Dark Elves do have instant construction. So they acquire slaves through Bal. There isn't any kind of limit on, like, say, the infection situation of Nurgle, so you can actually acquire a huge number of slaves through a single Bal, and then use those slaves for instant construction and dictat. So this is pretty good overall. Now, what are the problems with regards to the Dark Elves? Yes, they have a really good hero situation, they have a good economy, they get a lot of post-battle loot, they have a really powerful early game army as well, between Dark Shards, Black Arc Corsairs, which you can get from any Black Arc, though that is a bit annoying because you need In order to unlock this right to begin with, you do need to first construct a building, the slave pen buildings, which are only going to get one of these, and then just forget about it, because it's not really worth it all that much. Anyway, point is, in a Dark Elf campaign, the downside really has to do with their long-term potential, because a lot of their in-game units, things like Harganeth Executioners, things like Cold One Knights, Blackguard of Nagron, they're not exactly top-tier units. Sure, Cold One Dread Knights are pretty good, though I'm not sure I would qualify them as a tier 5 unit, like Bronze Shield. I mean, they're pretty solid, but they're not Grail Knights, suffice to say, and honestly, I would say they're a tier 4 unit at most. So there absolutely are certain issues with regards to the endgame variety. Early on, it's pretty good, except, Dark Riders and all that kind of stuff. But later on, it is more limited in a campaign. Then we could talk about the loyalty system that all your lords do end up having. So loyalty is honestly a fairly outdated system. Yes, it can give you some benefits, but honestly, I've never been too fond of the loyalty system in the game. Either it's irrelevant or it's just a pain in the neck. Beyond that, you do have these kind of names of power for lords, but what's a bit annoying here is that these names of power are randomized in a campaign. So sometimes you get very, very good names of power. Other times you get kind of like useless shit with some of these guys. Like, oh yeah, getting regeneration is great. Some other things, not so much. You always do end up having some level of choice, but those choices may not be the ones you're looking for. So I think some level of power, some level of choice of, actually you deciding what's important for you or being able to switch them up would be better. We've seen with ogres, or really with warriors of chaos, how that system can work in a somewhat better fashion, though I think it could be improved even further. And speaking about the lord situation, I would also say that Dreadlords are just much better than High Beastmasters and Supreme Sorceresses, because you have so many mages, you have powerful magic, but Dreadlords do ride on dragons, and they're very, very damn powerful. I mean, you can get one on a Supreme Sorcerer, sure, but it's not going to compare to the military capability that a Dreadlord is going to have, either sword and shield or crossbow and shield, crossbow and sword. I actually think the crossbow and sword might be better once you get them on a dragon, because, they lose the shield on the dragon anyway. So those are the kind of issues, like limitations long-term, lack of variety for lords, or real variety that's worth it for lords, those, and as well as rights, research tree, etc. Furthermore, Dark Elves do have a great deal of diplomatic power, because even with someone like Rumbrindle, who doesn't like Malekith, due to the level of aversion you do have with various factions, you can actually make a lot of military alliances work, and that's great for having a really fun and dynamic campaign, regardless of which of the Dark Elves you are playing as. The only ones who really hate you are the High Elves, for pretty clear and obvious reasons, who have a minus 100 level of aversion, but most other people don't have that kind of level of aversion. There's some level of it, of course, but you can generally deal with it, especially with region trading. The problem is that your confederation system is not especially great. Yes, you can confederate factions, but it is through regular diplomacy, and I think that regular confederations are in themselves an outdated system, and for whatever reason, Dark Elves are very reluctant to confederate other factions. Even as Malekith, who ends up having a diplomatic benefit with other Dark Elves, it's still something of a problem. And by the way, it's kind of really a ridiculous point to get extra allegiance points with alliances from Dark Elves, because most of those allies, the minor factions, are irrelevant, the major factions are fairly far away, so it's not really a big benefit from that perspective. And then finally, we do have a lack of unique Legendary Lord mechanics. I mean, technically we do, but really the only one that's workable is Lokir. If we look at Hellebrand, no one cares about Hellebrand's unique mechanic, or Malice Darkblades. I would say the bigger problem is that Malekith and Morathi do not have unique campaign mechanics, and Malekith especially should have an Eternity King mechanic. In particular, if we're going to have the Lords of the End Times being released, that's kind of one of the important storylines over there in the End Times that Creative Assembly should care about with respect to Malekith. And of course, there's all kinds of things with Tyrion, with Morathi, with Teclis. Absolutely. I mean, yes, you do have unique mechanics with Hellebron, Malice, Darkblade, and Rakarth, but they're all kind of rubbish from my point of view. And especially Rakarth does suffer from the Lustria syndrome, as I would call it. So here's the thing. Ultimately, you have a powerful race with a lot of choices to be made, especially in the early game, but the campaigns don't feel different enough to really make replayability worth it. And I think that's one of the bigger problems, or the biggest problem, for Dark Elves. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out.